On the day I closed on my dream home, my mother-in-law showed up with movers and declared, "This is now my house since you married my son." I thought she was joking until she threw my clothes onto the lawn. Then my realtor handed me a document that left her screaming. I swear to God, if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing in the front yard of my newly purchased dream home, watching my own clothes get tossed onto the grass by my mother-in-law, I would have laughed in their face. But there I was, clutching the keys to the house I had spent years working for, saving for, and dreaming about, only to watch a 56-year-old woman storm in like she owned the place and start throwing my stuff out like I was the one who didn't belong there. Let me back up a little. The house I worked my ass off for, this house was everything to me. It wasn't just some random house we picked out because it was in our budget. No, this was the house I had been dreaming of since I was a teenager. It sat on a quiet street in a small town outside of Austin, Texas, with a wraparound porch, big oak trees lining the driveway, and a backyard that stretched out into acres of open space. It was perfect. I spent years working overtime, building my credit, and saving every spare dollar to afford it. When my husband, Mark, and I got married 3 years ago, I made it very clear that this house was my end goal. My dream. Mark was supportive, or so I thought. He didn't contribute much to the down payment, but he always told me how proud he was that I was making it happen. So, when I finally closed on it, I was over the moon. My name was the only one on the deed because, well, I was the one who paid for it. Every cent of it. Mark didn't seem to care. He was happy to live there with me, happy to reap the benefits of the home I had worked my ass off for. I figured we'd be starting fresh together. The day everything went to hell, closing day. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My realtor handed me the keys, I popped a bottle of champagne in the empty kitchen, and I stood in the living room picturing how I'd decorate each room. That was exactly 2 hours before the moving truck pulled up, the one I didn't hire. At first, I thought there had been some mistake. Then I saw her. My mother-in-law. Her name is Denise, and let me just say this. Denise has never liked me. From day one, she has made it her personal mission to remind me that I'm not good enough for her son. She's the kind of woman who believes that her son should have married a woman who worships the ground she walks on. That a good wife should consult her mother-in-law for every decision. I don't even want to get into the wedding drama, the baby comments, or the way she tried to take over our finances after we got married. So when she climbed out of the moving truck, with hired movers behind her, I already knew she was up to something. She took one look at me standing there, keys still clutched in my hand, and smirked. This is now my house. I didn't even have a chance to process what was happening before she started barking orders at the movers. Put everything in the master bedroom. Be careful with my furniture. I want the bigger guest room for my office, so set up my desk in there. I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. Denise, what the hell is going on? She turned to me, tilted her head, and gave me the smuggest look I had ever seen. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, like I was a child who didn't understand the world. "Since you married my son, what's his is mine. And that means this house belongs to me." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud because I thought she was joking. "Denise, this isn't Mark's house. It's mine." She rolled her eyes. "That's not how marriage works, honey. When you marry someone, your assets become shared. And since Mark is my son, I have a right to live here." I swear, I felt my brain short-circuit. Before I could respond, she snapped her fingers at one of the movers and pointed at me. "Get her stuff out of here." And then, to my complete horror, they actually started throwing my clothes onto the lawn. Where the hell was my husband? I was still standing there in shock when Mark pulled into the driveway. I had never been so relieved in my life. Finally, someone sane would put a stop to this madness. He stepped out of the car, took one look at the scene, and sighed. Like this was inconvenient for him. I ran up to him, still clutching the keys. "Mark, can you please tell your mother that this is not her house?" He rubbed the back of his neck and avoided my eyes. "Babe, she's got a point." I blinked. "She's got a what?" "She's my mom. She's family. And she's right, what's mine is hers." My hands started shaking. "Mark, you didn't pay for this house. You didn't even contribute to the down payment. Your name isn't on the deed." "I know, but you're my wife. And she's my mom. It's only fair that we let her stay." The document that shut her up before I could even respond, my realtor, who had been watching this whole thing unfold, walked up to me and handed me a folder. "Maybe this will clear things up," she said. I had no idea what she was talking about until I opened it. Inside was a document I had never seen before. And the second I read the first few lines, my heart started pounding. Because it proved that Denise was in for the shock of her life. I stared at the paper, my hands gripping it so tight my knuckles went white. I could feel Denise hovering over my shoulder, trying to sneak a peek, but I stepped back before she could snatch it from me. "What's that?" she demanded, her smugness wavering just a little. I ignored her. I read the words over and over, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. It was a special clause in my home purchase agreement. One that my realtor, God bless her, had suggested after she heard all the stories about Denise and how much trouble she had caused in my marriage. The clause explicitly stated that only my name was on the deed, that I was the sole owner, and that any non-listed occupants, including in-laws, had no legal right to reside in the home unless I provided written consent. My realtor had even made sure it was notarized. I almost laughed. Denise had no legal standing here. None. I turned to her, the confidence rushing back into my body like a second wind. Denise, this house isn't Mark's. It's mine. And according to this document, I am the only person who decides who gets to live here. Her face twisted, and for the first time, she looked unsure. But Mark is your husband, she stammered. That means he gets a say. I get a say. Mark still wasn't making eye contact with me. Actually, he doesn't, my realtor cut in, stepping forward like a guardian angel. Unless his name is on the deed, which it isn't, he has no legal claim. And since your name isn't on it either, you, Mrs. Miller, have absolutely zero rights to this property. Denise's face turned red. I swear, if looks could kill, we'd all be dead. The screaming match in my front yard, Denise didn't take it well. She snatched the document from my hands and skimmed it, her breathing getting heavier by the second. Then she snapped. This is *T, she screeched, throwing the papers on the ground. How dare you do this to me? I folded my arms. Do what? Buy my own house? Work my ass off while you sat around doing nothing. She lunged toward me, but my realtor, God, I love that woman, stepped in between us. This is private property, she said firmly. And if you don't leave right now, I'll call the police. Denise let out a dramatic gasp like we had just suggested she be executed. Mark finally spoke up, but of course, not to defend me. Mom, let's talk about this inside, okay? Inside? Was he serious? She's not going inside, I snapped. She doesn't live here. And neither do you if you think you're going to let her walk all over me. That's when Denise turned on the waterworks. The woman actually dropped to her knees on my driveway like she was in some soap opera, wailing like I had just committed the ultimate betrayal. I gave my entire life to raising you, Mark, she sobbed. And this is how you repay me? By letting this gold-digging, selfish woman kick me out of my own son's house. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sheer audacity of this woman was almost impressive. I turned to Mark. Tell her the truth, I said coldly. Tell her that you didn't pay for this house. Tell her that you have no legal claim to it. Tell her that this is my home, not yours. He froze. Denise stared at him, waiting. The movers stood awkwardly by the truck, probably wondering if they should start unpacking or run for their lives. And then Mark hesitated. That was all I needed to see. He wasn't on my side. The twist that made everything worse just when I thought the situation couldn't get any crazier, Denise suddenly stood up, wiped her fake tears, and smirked. Oh, sweetie, she said, voice sickly sweet. You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming. And then she pulled something out of her purse. A folder. I stared at it, dread creeping up my spine. What is that? I asked. She grinned. This, she said, waving it in front of me, is a little surprise. Let's see how smart you feel after reading this. She shoved the papers into my hands. I opened them, and my blood went cold. The betrayal I never saw coming, it was a marriage contract. One I had never seen before. And inside was a clause that made my stomach drop. Apparently, Mark and Denise had gone behind my back and had a lawyer draft an agreement stating that in the event of a separation or divorce, Mark would be entitled to half of all marital assets, including the house. Half. Half of a house he didn't pay for. Half of a house that was mine. Denise was grinning like a Cheshire cat. Oops, she said. Looks like you're not as clever as you thought. I looked at Mark, my heart pounding. You knew about this? His face was pale. Silent. Denise cackled. Actually cackled. Guess you're not as independent as you thought, sweetheart, she sneered. Now, why don't you be a good little wife and start moving my things inside? And that was the moment I realized my marriage was over. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the contract in my hands. My vision blurred, my pulse pounded in my ears, and my stomach felt like it had dropped straight to hell. Mark, my husband. The man who had stood beside me while I signed the mortgage papers. The man who had let me believe I was building a future with him. Had gone behind my back. With his mother. To make sure he could take half of my house if things ever went south. And the way Denise was smirking like she had just won some grand battle? Oh, I wanted to wipe that look off her face so badly. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to speak. Mark, I said, my voice shockingly calm for the rage bubbling beneath it. Explain this. Right now. He swallowed hard. Avoided my eyes. Look, he mumbled. It's just a precaution. You know, just in case. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. I stared at him like I didn't even know who he was. Denise let out an exaggerated sigh. Oh, stop being dramatic. It's just legal protection. Mark is your husband. He deserves a safety net. Honestly, I don't know why you're so upset. Unless, she trailed off, tilting her head in mock concern. Unless you were already planning to leave him. I felt my fists clench. You're unbelievable, I said through gritted teeth. I worked my ass off for this house. I paid for everything. And you think you can just swoop in and take half of it? Mark finally met my gaze. It's not like that. You're my wife, we share things, I let out a bitter laugh. We don't share **T Mark. Not when you're sneaking around with your mother to try and screw me over. The paper trail that ruined them. That's when my realtor, my absolute hero of a realtor, cleared her throat. I hate to interrupt, she said, her voice sharp, but I need to point something out here. We all turned to her as she pulled out another set of documents from her bag. Denise rolled her eyes. Oh, what now? My realtor ignored her and handed me the papers. This is the finalized home purchase agreement. You'll notice that this house was purchased solely under your name before any marital assets were involved. I scanned the pages, my pulse racing. Then she flipped to another section and pointed. And right here, it clearly states that this property is protected as separate property in the event of a divorce. Meaning that contract Denise just handed you. She smiled sweetly. It's worthless. Silence. Complete, utter silence. And then what? Denise's screech echoed through the neighborhood. I swear to God, birds flew out of the trees. She ripped the document out of my hands and scanned it, her face turning an unflattering shade of purple. This is fake, she shrieked. It has to be. There's no way, it's legal, my realtor said coolly. And fully binding. Your little contract holds no power here. Denise looked like she was going to explode. Mark? He was just standing there like an idiot. I turned to him, my hands shaking. So? What now, Mark? Were you in on this from the start, or did mommy rope you into her insane plan? He ran a hand down his face. I didn't think it would come to this. Oh, for **CK's sake, Mark. I threw the contract onto the ground and turned on my heel, marching toward the house. If they thought I was going to let them walk all over me, they had another thing coming. But just as I reached the front door, Denise made her next move. The lock changed from hell. I heard a loud click, followed by a beep, then another click. I turned back just in time to see Denise stepping away from my front door, holding her phone, and grinning. Oops, she said, tucking her phone into her purse. Looks like the smart locks are now registered to my account. I blinked. My brain couldn't process what she was saying. What? Denise smirked. You really should have changed the default admin code, sweetheart. I did a little digging while Mark was setting up this smart home system last week. And guess what? Now, I control who comes and goes. She locked me out of my own house. My dream house. That I paid for. My body went ice cold. The moment I saw Red, Denise turned to the movers. Well, she snapped. Why are you standing there? Start bringing my things inside. And then I lost it. I charged toward her, pure fury pumping through my veins, but before I could grab her phone, Mark stepped in front of me. Babe, calm down, he said, putting his hands up like I was the one being irrational. I shoved him away. Hard. Are you kidding me? She just locked me out of my own house. She's just trying to make a point, he mumbled. I didn't even let him finish. I pulled out my own phone. And I called the cops. Denise's first time in handcuffs. I stood in my own front yard, my heart racing as I explained everything to the dispatcher. The fraudulent attempt to take over my home. The illegal access to my smart locks. The fact that she had literally thrown my belongings onto the lawn. When I hung up, Denise let out a mocking laugh. Oh, please. You think the police are going to do anything? This is a family matter. I smiled. Oh, I think they'll be very interested in how you just committed unlawful entry and attempted property theft. That wiped the smirk off her face. And sure enough, when the cops arrived 15 minutes later, Denise went full hysterical mode. She screamed. She cried. She claimed the house was hers. She even had the audacity to point at my husband and say, Tell them this is my home too. Mark? He stayed silent. Didn't defend her. Didn't defend me. Just stood there, looking like a fool. That's when the officer, an older guy who looked like he had dealt with one too many entitled mothers-in-law in his lifetime, sighed and said, Ma'am, do you have any proof that your name is on this deed? Silence. More silence. Then, well, no, but then I'm going to need you to step away from the property. Denise's face went wild. She turned to Mark, grabbing at his shirt. Do something. Mark just shook his head. And when the cops finally put Denise in handcuffs for trespassing and illegal tampering with property, I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. But the real nightmare wasn't over yet. Because just as the cop was leading her toward the squad car, Mark turned to me. And he said something that made my blood run cold. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Final part. The moment everything fell apart, Mark's words hit me like a truck. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. I stood there, my heart pounding, watching as the cops placed his mother into the back of the squad car. The street was quiet except for the sound of Denise's screeching protests and the soft murmurs of the movers, who had long stopped unloading boxes and were now watching the disaster unfold like it was a reality show. Mark's face was stone cold. Not angry, not regretful, just blank. That scared me more than anything. I squared my shoulders, forcing my voice to stay even. Excuse me? Mark took a slow step forward. You didn't have to do this. I let out a hollow laugh. Oh, I'm sorry. Was I supposed to just let your mother steal my house? You didn't have to get the cops involved. I narrowed my eyes. She locked me out of my own home, Mark. That's a crime. And if you actually cared about me, hell, if you had even a shred of decency, you'd be apologizing. Instead, you're acting like I'm the bad guy. His jaw clenched. She's my mother. And I was your wife. That made him flinch. Good. The secret he never wanted me to know at this point, the neighbors were peeking out their windows. The movers were whispering among themselves, and my realtor had her arms crossed, watching intently, ready to step in if Mark tried anything. I didn't care. Let them see. Let them hear every single word. I took a step closer to him, voice low but dangerous. Tell me something, Mark. How long was this plan in motion? How long were you and Denise scheming behind my back? He hesitated. Just for a second. But I caught it, and in that hesitation I knew. I knew the truth before he even opened his mouth. It had never just been about Denise moving in. It had never just been about her trying to take over. This had always been a setup. He wasn't just an innocent bystander. He had been in on it from the start. The contract, the secret meeting with the lawyer, the entitlement he had shown when he acted like my house was his. Mark wasn't just defending Denise. He had planned to screw me over from the very beginning. You son of a b asterisk tch, I whispered. His eyes flickered. It wasn't like that, bullsh asterisk t. He ran a hand down his face. Look, babe, I know. Do not, babe me. I took another step forward, and for the first time, he looked scared. How long? He opened his mouth, closed it, and then, since before we got married. The words came out so quietly I almost didn't hear them. But I did, and something inside me snapped. Public humiliation, I laughed. A loud, bitter, unhinged kind of laugh. The kind that made the movers shift uncomfortably and my realtor glance between us like she was waiting for the next explosion. Mark winced. Good. He deserved to feel every ounce of humiliation I was about to throw at him. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. You married me, knowing damn well that this was your plan? You smiled at me, told me you loved me, let me buy this house, knowing you were going to try and take half of it with your mom. His face twisted. It wasn't like that, then what the hell was it like? I shouted. Tell me, Mark. Enlighten me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and your psycho mother saw me as nothing more than a walking bank account. His mouth opened, but I wasn't done. I turned to the movers, who were now completely invested in the drama. Hey, guys. One of them blinked. Yeah. Do you want to know how much money this man contributed to this house? I gestured to Mark, who was now turning red. The movers exchanged glances. Sure. I held up my hand in an O. 0. Not a single damn cent. And yet, he and his mom thought they could just move in and take over. I turned back to Mark, my voice dripping with venom. Tell me, Mark. How exactly were you planning to pull this off? Were you going to divorce me the second your name was on the deed? Move Denise in and kick me out? He didn't answer. Because we both knew that was exactly the plan. And now, everyone knew it. The final goodbye, something shifted in Mark's expression. For the first time, he looked ashamed. But I didn't care. He had chosen his side. I took a deep breath and stepped back. You're done here, Mark. Both of you. His eyes widened. Wait, what? I'm done. My voice was steady now. Final. You and your mother are out of my house. Out of my life. And if you even try to fight me on this, I'll make sure Denise enjoys her criminal record. Mark panicked. Come on, let's just talk about this. No, I turned to the cops. Officers, please escort my soon-to-be ex-husband off my property. Mark's face twisted in horror. You're divorcing me over this? I laughed again, this time softer. Emptier. You destroyed this marriage long before today. The officers didn't need to be told twice. Denise was still screaming in the back of the squad car as the cops led Mark toward the street. He kept turning back, pleading with his eyes, but I didn't budge. I didn't feel anything anymore. I just watched. And when the cop car finally pulled away, taking both Denise and Mark with it, I exhaled. I don't remember how long I stood there. I don't remember when my realtor finally pulled me inside, away from the stares of the neighbors. I just remember sitting in the empty living room, my living room, feeling completely and utterly drained. I had lost my marriage, but I had kept my home, And as the silence of the house settled around me, I realized something. I had been carrying Mark for years. Financially, emotionally, mentally. And now? I was finally free. I poured myself a glass of champagne, the same bottle I had opened earlier that day, before everything had gone to hell, and raised it to the empty room. To my dream home, I whispered. And then I took a sip. It tasted like peace. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. I should have noticed the way Mark never truly stood up to his mother. The way he let her weave herself into our lives like a parasite. But I didn't. And that's on me. But you know what? I learned my lesson. And now? I'm never letting anyone take advantage of me again. Not a man. Not his mother. Not anyone. I earned this life. And I'm keeping it. The end.